Welcome. This week's topic is on nutrition tools, and this segment is on our recommended intakes. The dietary reference intakes are essentially a set of nutrient recommendations that are generated for the United States, and they're taken from research and the DRI committee, so the Dietary Reference Intake Committee, establishes these guidelines after they review the research. Within our DRIs, that's what we call them, DRIs, there is the established average requirement, which I'll go over, the recommended dietary allowance, adequate intakes, and tolerable upper intake level. Just to get an idea, when we think about our recommended dietary allowances, which is based on research, and our adequate intakes, and this is more of an estimated or educated guess, you can see the values for the minerals shown here, such as calcium, chromium, copper, fluoride, and then they're always given for different age groups. So they look at, and based on gender, so infants, children, males, females, and then there are different recommendations during pregnancy and lactation. You'll find these recommendations on the inside cover of your textbook. The recommended dietary allowance, the RDA, is based on scientific research. A number of studies are done on, let's say, for example, the average intake that's necessary for health, for calcium, for fluoride, for chromium, for vitamin A, D, so for all of our nutrients. And when there's a lot of research in the area, we call it the bedrock of scientific evidence, then the committee can actually say that there is a recommended dietary allowance for that nutrient based on solid research. When there's not enough research, and it's either there haven't been enough studies or there haven't been enough quality studies, they call this an adequate intake, and it's an AI. So we either say RDA or AI, the adequate intake, and that just means that they have made an educated guess based on the evidence that we have at this time. So it's just the best guess at this time, an educated guess based on the research that is available. Whereas the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance, is based on solid scientific evidence. Now, when we think about that, I was naming off vitamins and minerals, but what about, and those are our micronutrients, what about our macronutrients? We have recommendations for each of our 3 macronutrients. Carbohydrates need to be 45 to 65% of our diet, fat 20 to 35% of our diet, and protein 10 to 35% of our diet. I have in quotes here 10 to 15%, and that's because most Americans only need 10 to 15% of their diet to be from protein. The AMDR, which is for our carbohydrates, fat, and protein, is basically the same thing. It's just called the acceptable macronutrient density range. So it's essentially the amount you should be eating, the range that you should be eating for carbohydrates, fat, and protein. And notice that everything's a range. So 45 to 65% of the diet, or fat 20 to 35% of the diet. And remember, these are your macronutrients, your energy yielding nutrients. These are the nutrients that give you energy, and the only nutrients that give you energy. Alcohol does contribute energy, but we don't consider alcohol a nutrient. Remember, vitamins and minerals do not give us energy. Those are our micronutrients. So what does this look like? If you were going to have a diet that was 45% carbohydrates, so that's on the lower end of our range. Remember, that's 45 to 65%, and with fat at about 30% and protein 25%, this is what the diet would end up looking like. Remember, these are always going to add up to 100. You can't have more than 100, or it'll be just slightly over or slightly below. Now, what if you're at the upper end of the range for carbohydrates, 65%? So this is a total calorie contribution for the diet. Fat is 20% in this example, and 15% is protein. This is a diagram from Choose My Plate or My Plate, and it's from the 2010 Dietary Guidelines, essentially showing what your plate should look like. And one of the things I think is fantastic about it is it gives a very good visualization of when you put food on your plate, which food groups should take up which portions of the plate. And look at fruits and vegetables really taking up half the plate. That's a very good standard to go by. What I'm going to mention is that, protein, the way that the My Plate set up is that protein usually is consisting more of meat, fish, and so if you're a vegetarian, you might have more beans and legumes in this area. That could be tofu in the protein area. For grains, there are some people who don't eat a lot of grains. It doesn't have to take up this much, but in place of that, it really should be vegetables. And again, you might be lactose intolerant. You don't necessarily need to include dairy. If you do include dairy, it really should be low fat. So what I've done here is I've shown that we need 45 to 65% of the diet from carbohydrates. That's our recommended range. And what is a carbohydrate? What makes up carbohydrates? Well, everyone would guess grains, right? And then if I said a potato, you say that would be carbohydrate as well. It fits into our vegetable category. But fruits have sugar. Sugars are carbohydrates. And then dairy, we have lactose. We have a sugar in dairy, so that contributes carbohydrates as well. And this is for protein. Remember, it's 10 to 35% is the recommendation. You want to focus on about 10 to 15% of your diet from protein. And getting plant protein is definitely fine if you're not a meat eater. We generally think of meat, fish, poultry giving us most of our protein. But again, beans and legumes are a really good protein source. We're going to get a little bit of protein from vegetables, and also in grains. Grains actually have protein as well. And dairy is a very good source of protein as well. Very few fruits are going to have much protein, although there might be little tiny bits of protein in there. Fat. So where does fat come from? 20 to 35% of your diet should be from fat. I think a lot of us think about the fat on meat, on a steak, as contributing a source of fat, or you think about ice cream as a dessert, and that's not really considered, your dairy serving at all. But you can definitely, in a lot of the dairy products, you're definitely going to find some milk fat in there. Grains, though, can definitely have a little bit of fat. Very, very tiny amount in the vegetables. Fruits, avocado is a fruit, so that's an example of having fat in fruits. Good source of healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids would be coming from fish. And then also you think about seeds. Seeds such as flax seeds give omega-3 fatty acids. Nuts definitely give omega-3 fatty acids as well. So the nuts and seeds will give you very good sources of fat. And of course, oils. Oils are going to be our large contributor of fats in the American diet, but things like olive oil is a very good source of a healthy fat. The processed refined vegetable oils that come in processed foods, not very good to add to your diet.